Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to participate today in the InnovaConcrete KAUNAS workshop. Thank you, Gunny, for leading the two sessions this morning. I wanted to give a special thanks to everyone who helped organize this two-day event. It's certainly terrific to see so many familiar faces. I wanted to especially thank Vaidas Petrulis for organizing this event with his colleagues in Lithuania. Everyone has been wonderfully organized and has made it very easy for all of us to participate. I also wanted to thank leaders of the ISC 20C InnovaConcrete program, that includes Gunny and Fernando and Stefania, for helping with not only the long-term program that we've been fortunate to work on, but also for helping to spearhead this workshop and organize it over the last year. So with that, I'll get started. I'm pleased to moderate today's session entitled Reinforced Concrete Monuments, Intentions and Consequences. In this panel discussion, we will continue to examine reinforced concrete structures and how they are regarded and symbolized throughout the 20th century architecture. I think we're all aware that many of the most important examples of reinforced concrete of the 20th century were specifically constructed as symbols. So we'll be looking at that a little bit more closely in this session. These include museums and monuments of political significance, buildings to commemorate, for example, various anniversaries and other places of ideological meaning, for example. I know today we have been discussing these narratives in terms of the monuments as being perceived through a source of multifaceted narratives. On the one hand, these monuments perfectly represent the aesthetic potential of reinforced concrete as a material. And on the other hand, these monuments also provide close links with political ideologies frequently that provoke harsh public reactions. And I know that we had quite a bit of discussion about this earlier today. As a result, I think this change of meaning over time, and in many cases, our lack of how to appreciate these structures, is most likely why many of these monuments have been abandoned, relocated, or as we discussed in the last session, even destroyed most recently and in the last decades. We can't afford to do this, obviously, and I think this session will help illuminate looking at some of the examples of these monuments through our speakers and their presentations, and how we might represent and discuss more about the phenomenon of this type of 20th century architecture. So with that, I'd like to introduce our four speakers. Our four speakers today are Jörg Haspel, Sigrid Brandt, Vaidas Petrulis, and Sandra Uskokovic, who was unable to join us today, but has sent a recording of her presentation, which we'll hear after our first three speakers. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Jörg. Jörg will give a presentation today entitled Reinforced Concrete Monuments, Miscellaneous from the Eastern Modernism. Professor Jörg Haspel has been a state curator and director of the Berlin Heritage Conservation Authority. He is, as many of you know, a founding member of the ICOMOS ISC on 20th Century Heritage and an expert member of the ISC Theory and Philosophy. In 2009, he was elected vice president. In 2012, president of ICOMOS Germany, and supported the formation of the new Blue Shield Committee Germany and of the Archaeological Heritage Network. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Jörg.
Yes, thank you very much, Carl. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you are able to hear me. So I have to apologize, first of all, that I couldn't stay and join you all the day longer, and also yesterday only partly, because we had the board meeting of ICOMOS Germany today, so I didn't get all the contributions, but I saw the program, the agenda, and it is very interesting and it is very helpful. And I would like to thank all of those who were involved in the project to do this InnovaConcrete e-commerce project. I will try to start. Oh, sorry. The architectural heritage of 20th century is architecture as a vast extent by steel and glass and reinforced concrete constructions. But it is obvious that concrete or reinforced concrete as a visible construction and material facet only found its way very late in the memorial architecture or in the commemorating architecture and in monument buildings. At least in Germany, works of art and architecture in the tradition of natural stone and brick buildings dominated the scene for the first decade. Even this world-famous Einstein Tower by Erich Mendelssohn, which looks like a plastic concrete sculpture and visionary architecture for a futuristic technical observatory, was conventionally built as a masonry structure and plastered, and has been restored twice in the last decades. Here you can see the building. And Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's Monument to the Revolution from 1926, designed by the last Bauhaus director to commemorate Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht as victims of the German Revolution, was erected as a red brick monument. And it was destroyed by the National Socialists in January 1935. And what is also interesting, it was not rebuilt after World War II in the socialist part of Berlin. The monument to the March Dead, which was designed by the founder of the and first Bauhaus director, Walter Gropius, in 1920, as an expressionist monument at the Central Cemetery in Weimar to commemorate the workers killed in the Kapp-Putsch 1920, is a second example. The structure was built between 20 and 22. It was destroyed by the Nazis as a work of degenerate art in February 1936, and it was reconstructed after World War II in 1946, so very early at the beginning of after World War II. It has been repaired repeatedly since then, and a new concrete renovation to cover the accreting reinforcements seems to be necessary again. This is a contemporary picture or photograph of the memorial. The Wiesinger grave, which is located on a cemetery close to Berlin and designed by Max Taut, the brother of Bruno Taut, is a second early example and an exemption confirming the rule or the hypothesis of a dominance of traditional materials in memorial architecture in the interwar period. The concrete grid construction of Gothic expressionist framework was executed for a wealthy Berlin merchant after World War I, and it was rediscovered, you can say, in 1985, and now it has been continuously repaired and maintained, as you can see here. Now I would like to jump to the post-war modernism. The way from traditional building materials and techniques to precast concrete slab constructions and modern mass housing has been presented variously within conferences and publications of our International Scientific Committee of 20th Century, as well as of Docomomo, most recently in the joint conference publication on modern heritage, identifying, assessing and managing its protection and conservation, which took place in Florence in 2016 in cooperation with the Theory and Philosophy Committee. The Berlin monument for the first Plattenbau, for the first slab construction or panel construction, built in Berlin-Marzahn in 1974, is a symbolic reinforced concrete topping out grown on a reinforced concrete pylon at the so-called Alley of the Cosmonauts. It recalls the triumph of prefabricated panel construction in mass housing in Eastern Europe, and it is still existing. It's very interesting to see on the bottom there is the modular or the building worker, which is symbolized and cut out in the wall. An exceptional figure among the planning collectives in the GDR was Ulrich Müther. He was inspired by Felix Candela from Mexico, for example, by Heinz Isler from Switzerland, and he was one of the leading designers of post-war modernism in cast concrete. He worked as an architect and as an engineer, but he was able to realize his projects because he had a special construction company which he managed and to proceed to create shell constructions. From the design, through the planning, to the execution, it was all in one hand. His trademark were wide-span concrete shell constructions, and there you can see his tomb with the shell construction, which was the logo, the signet of the company or of the corporate. He called them hyper shells, so hyperbolic paraboloids, and it was, you can say, a trademark of Müther. He had not only success in GDR, but also abroad, and he brought foreign currency to the GDR. One of the very early examples is this bus stop, but there are also multi-purpose halls, planetarium, domes, spheric shells, and so on, as you can see here, for example. One of the most prominent concrete shell constructions, and unfortunately one of the most prominent losses of his oeuvre, is the large restaurant Ahornblatt, which is translated Maple Leaf in Berlin Mitte, located in immediate vicinity to the GDR Ministry of Construction, whose employees also used this hyparchal as a canteen. A contemporary stamp motif shows how the building was not only intended to fulfill its purpose as a restaurant, but it also formed a kind of architectural signal of progress and of cosmopolitanism in the GDR. The achievement of socialist modernism could be distributed all over the world by post. And Emaille mural painting by Walter Wommacker, which decorated the neighboring Ministry of Construction under the motto, "Man, measure of all things," also features the hypershell geometry at the, you see it above the building worker or the construction worker as a symbol of a forward-looking building production. In contrast to this very optimistic mural, which escaped destruction by being relocated to a residential building in the neighborhood, the shell construction of the listed Maple Leaf fell victim to demolition in 2000. It was said that it was for urban reasons, but you can assume that it was certainly also for ideological and aesthetic reasons, because the landmark of a new socialist age stood in the way of the post-socialist planning guideline of a critical reconstruction of historic Berlin. Here you can see when it was destructed in 2000, and here you have a collage where you can see where it was and what kind of architecture, of commercial architecture, replaced this building. In fact, according to the Müther archive, about 30 buildings of Müther's company have been disappeared in the last 30 years. And not least as a result of the Berlin debate about the Ahornblatt, many of his constructions are now listed monuments. 3 concrete buildings have been renovated in the course of the last years, among them with the support of the Wüstenrot Foundation. The Wüstenrot Foundation is in Germany something like the Getty Foundation, which is very specialized on post-war architecture and modernist heritage. With the help of the Wüstenrot Foundation and its, which is funding and focusing post-war architecture, the Musik Pavilion in Sassnitz could be repaired, and also the UFO-like rescue station in Binz on the island of Rügen. Both are close to the home region of Müther. A more detailed report you can find about this measures in the conference paper, which was published by ICOMOS under the title "A Future for Our Recent Past: Model Projects of Modern Heritage Conservation in Europe." And this volume is also available in the internet, so everybody is able to have a download. One of the longest and perhaps maybe one of the most significant concrete structures in history of the 20th century was the wall as part of the Iron Curtain, dividing not only Berlin, but the whole of Germany between 1961 and 1989. The bitter dispute over the preservation of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain now seems to have come to an end or to a standstill. Today, the strongest and most tireless enemies of the concrete elements is not longer the enemies of Cold War or Cold Warrior. It is the weather, it is rain, snow, ice, frost, and alkali Sicilia drift and corrosion. It endangers many concrete fragments of this unique 20th century cultural property. And it is fortunately to the 20th century that it has not only developed concrete, but it has also developed to solve the problems which we meet today with the heritage of 20th century. Allow me a last in memoriam. That is, over the last days, news reached us that Gottfried Böhm, one of the two Pritzker Prize winners from Germany, has passed away at the age of 101 years. He brought heaven to earth. That was the headline at a newspaper. And I would like to add, Gottfried Böhm brought heaven to earth with concrete. A great international architect has taken his leave, but he has left masterpieces of modern concrete architecture and brutalism in Germany. His works were and are still discussed controversially. They are disputed, but their restoration and rehabilitation are an obligation, I think. And I'm sure and very thankful for the work that has been done within the InnovaConcrete and ICOMOS project, that it can make an important contribution to solve this problem and to meet these aims. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Very good presentation. I think we'll come back at the end with some questions for the panelists once we've had an opportunity to hear everyone. All right, so our next speaker is Sigrid Brandt. Professor Sigrid Brandt is currently the Vice President of ICOMOS Germany. Dr. Brandt studied musicology and art history at Humboldt University in Berlin. She has a master's degree in music history of the 1920s, a doctorate in the history of monument preservation, and is the 2005-2008 scientific assistant at the University of Berlin. Today, Sigrid will be speaking on the Mainz Town Hall. And I think, Sigrid, you need to undo your microphone.
It's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Thank you. Yes.
Good.
Welcome.
Welcome. And thanks a lot for the invitation. And I was also at the board meeting of ICOMOS Germany. And now I will try to test the presentation. I try. Okay. Yeah. No, it's not the right. Oh. Okay. Then we can start. The Mainz Town Hall is my object for this discussion, and after lengthy discussions, the Mainz Town Hall was inaugurated on New Year's Eve year in 1973. There had been controversy, particularly over its volume, its integration into the preserved cityscape, and its competition with Mainz Cathedral. It was supposed to symbolize a new civic pride, a new sense of citizenship, and, I quote the Lord Major Jockel Fuchs from 1965, self-expression of the creative will of our generation, quote end. The post-war years were over. Lightness, transparency, all gestures of modesty and restraint now gave way to large, heavy buildings and mighty, rugged masses of construction. An example of this tendency is the Ingolstadt Theater and Concert Hall, a huge sculpture made of concrete, a massive composition. And I had the same ideas like your Kasper. The Bensberg Town Hall by Gottfried Böhm stands with its fortified tower high above the city, full of demonstrative power and reminiscent of the peak of a mountain. The tendency towards monumental, pictorial architecture is not, however, a development that can be observed in the Federal Republic alone. The architecture of Louis Kahn, for example, after whose designs the Parliament building of Bangladesh was built from 1964, received international attention. Alongside the Finnish architect Alvar Aalto, the Danish architect Arne Jacobsen was considered the most important representative of Scandinavian architecture after the Second World War, to which not only Germany, but also Austria, I recall the Bruckner House in Linz by Kaya and Heikki Siren, turned its gaze. This modern monumentalism is still difficult to communicate today if one disregards the connoisseurs of 20th century architectural history and the preservationists. The building, which is supposed to stand for civic sense and civic pride, is characterized by an architectural seclusion. Its fortified nature has provoked the term civil servants' prison. Opposed to these arguments of communal autonomy, which the building symbolizes, and in the face of the nearby cathedral, the symbol of an almost sacred claim of the citizens in their encounter with the institution of the church. The building's value has been repeatedly degraded not only by politicians, but also by the media. The growing structural damage due to lack of maintenance has contributed to this in recent years. The Norwegian limestone slabs have a decisive influence on the building, but they no longer sit firmly. Attempts to anchor them more firmly with dowels led to corrosion damage. The slabs show cracks, break due to the stress of wind, snow and rain, and bulge like warts. The flat roof is giving trouble and leaking. Energy deficiencies demand new solutions. The building services are more than outdated after 40 years, and regular minor renovations have not taken place. In 2012, the costs for a renovation amounted to an estimated 47 million. Today, a few days ago, more than 100 million euros are being discussed. And I think even these will not be enough. ICOMOS Germany moved its annual conference to Mainz in 2015 for good reason, to mark the anniversary of the founding of ICOMOS. The conference proceedings state, I quote, "The town hall in Mainz, built according to designs by the Danish architects Arne Jacobsen and Otto Weidling, and opened in 1973. The building is both controversial and venerated. It represents an architectural language used not long ago, but already seeming unfamiliar. At closer inspection, the building reveals that it is remarkably tradition conscious. in its urban disposition and its form and material. What is more, it has largely been preserved in its original form. Therefore, it did not merely serve as backdrop for this conference, but rather as vivid object for study and memorable value. The circular council hall inside the building symbolizes an almost historical process. 500 years earlier, all privileges of the citizens had been abolished and placed under the rule of the Elector of Mainz. Today's Mainz Town Hall thus stands for a regained sovereignty and a rediscovered self-confidence of the citizens of Mainz. The auditorium place for the public events located above the council chamber also contributes to this. Architectural critics therefore put its way in 1973, I quote, "The construction of the town hall is an event of the century," quote end. Despite the impressive architecture, also on the inside, the building remains a serious renovation case. The arguments for incurring these costs for a high-ranking monument of the 20th century are manifold. First, the utilization concept by Arne Jacobsen envisaged larger areas inside for the exhibitions and cultural events. The building is a public meeting place in the best sense of the word. The Mainz Town Hall is thus also a place of active social participation. In the historical context of the early 70s, Mainz Town Hall stands for an international exchange. This was by no means a matter of course of the Federal Republic, which was striving for recognition. The demonstrative size of Mainz Town Hall stands not least for an increasing secularization in the Federal Republic of Germany at the time. And the fourth, the pulsating metropolis of Mainz, a glance of the aerial photograph is enough, is very well able to integrate this building into its overall concept. Recently, a digital room book of the building has been compiled. The political and the public will to preserve it has obviously grown. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sigrid Brandt. Again, I think we can take some questions at the end with the panelists. Our next speaker is Vidas Petrulis. Vidas, are you still on? Yes, okay. So Vidas will be speaking on the 9th Fort Monument in KAUNAS, Lithuania. And Vidas is a senior researcher at the Institute of Architecture and Construction at KAUNAS University of Technology. He is a co-author of books on architecture in Soviet Lithuania, architectural heritage of the interwar period, and other monographs. With that, I'd like to introduce Vidas, and he will give his presentation.
Yes, hello once again for everyone. And the idea was that I continue my presentation, which I gave in the morning. Since we are running out of time, I will try to be very short. But what I wanted to show and to discuss and to present to all of us that all these Soviet monuments we were talking and we were seeing in the morning actually have very different destinies, and some of them already lost its previous intention, and some of them were still intact in the places we were built. So for the most ideological sculptures, Lenin's, Stalin's, and many other so-called Soviet heroes. Of course, we were removed in 1989 and 1993, and you just can see one of such cases, and we were moved to a special park. It's a Grūto Parkas. It's actually in the south of Lithuania, quite far away from Vilnius or KAUNAS, but it's a good location in the forest. You can enjoy this as a kind of a zoo, and this is one of the examples. In urban areas, actually, if you are talking about the early period after the gaining independence, in some places, for example, here is a picture from KAUNAS. It used to be a tank, Joseph Stalin. You have seen it in the morning. If you still have patience to keep watching, and instead of this, we have a small improvised hill of crosses. Of course, I should mention that Lithuania is famous for wooden crosses, and we are even on UNESCO in the list of intangible heritage of woodcrafts and carving tradition. Some of them, some of these tanks and sculptures were moved to different private collections, private museums, as one is already Homestead, and but some of ideological or less ideological sculptures, we are still intact. We are still in the places we are, and here you can see the picture of Green Bridge. Well, actually, it was removed, but not so long time ago. These sculptures, clearly ideological places, actually is provoking a lot of discussions. And one option, of course, is to remove and to do second cleaning of our urban space. But another option is to suggest interpretations, and here you can see one interpretation by office of Audrius Ambrosas, architect in Vilnius. He suggested to put these soldiers in cages, and so to communicate that we put this our period in a certain place, and we are left not for admiring, but for knowing history. And right now we have another very hot discussion on the monument of Petras Cvirkas. Cvirka, the writer, who is politically involved into the occupation, and that monument still stands. So some of the artists suggest again to do a kind of an interpretation, and here maybe it's not a very serious project, more a joke, but still it suggests to put lasers into the eyes of Cvirka and just to feel the political power from his eyes. Well, and that's actually the last slide I wanted to share. And the idea, as already mentioned, it was not to give some new presentation, new topic, not to open the new topic, but just a little contemplate on the different destinies of these Soviet monuments. And the Ninth Fort is actually just on one really rare cases, which is stand and which is not going to be demolished. So since we are really late in our discussions, I would suggest to move on and to leave it for later discussions after we will hear Sandra's presentation. Kyle, if we are experiencing technical difficulties, and since we are almost at the end of our scheduled time, Probably let's keep it for future. How do you think, Sandra?
That sounds good. That sounds good. So perhaps we could move just a few minutes to a question for the speakers. I think we've had the opportunity to hear 3 presentations today, looking at the history of memory and key elements that make up the complexity of significance for these structures. And I think there was a comment earlier from one of the attendees of the conference that the statement was along the lines that the ebb and flow of meaning and relationship to these concrete monuments and structures of the last century is in a way characterization for us to understand the potential of our humanity. That potentially, you know, moments in time could serve as reference points to air the centrality of some of the objects' significance. And I was wondering if each one of the speakers could comment or illuminate on your own experience on how to bring some of those moments of significance to the public and how to integrate those meanings of the past with current contemporary society. Because I know that we've had many challenges that we've discussed, but perhaps we could, you know, each reflect on that and talk a little bit about what you're each doing in your own work to bring that forward. So, York, maybe you could start.
Yes, it's a difficult question, but I think in the presentation in the last round, it was Barnabas who told us the ecological dimension of keeping brutalist and concrete buildings, which are, even if they are not liked and not loved and not well accepted, because it's not only a conservationist issue, it's also a question how to survive or how to keep the situation. And that is one point which will alter the attitude of the public as well as of the politicians towards concrete architecture. It's not a question, do we estimate the ideological, aesthetic, philosophical, ethic attitude of the builders, but what are the alternatives? And we have to finish or to finalize the process of replacing always all kind of architecture which is not loved or not liked by the contemporaries. So we have to define a new attitude or a new approach to the history. And the second one is, as far as I could see or notice in the last years, for example, the brutalist activities, which were also initiated by Wüstenrot Stiftung and others, and by the German Architectural Museum with this big exhibition, it has changed the mind, at least in Germany or in German-speaking countries, towards concrete architecture and towards brutalism and visible concrete architecture. So I think it's a progress or a process of generations to teach them and to talk to them, and it will define a new aesthetic appreciation of this kind of architecture. I'm rather optimistic, but I fear that we will have some losses in between before we have overcome and convinced all of them. But I think also the presentations I saw yesterday and today in this project, it is fantastic. I'm really enthusiastic about it. And I think we have to multiply it and to communicate it, not only in the circle of experts, in the inner circle, but to communicate it in a broad public audience. And the next generation is much more open than the last or the contemporary generation in its majority are. And that is, that's a chance, I hope, or a hope. It's a hope.
So it's a hope that as we move further along, we are able then to appreciate the past in a different context. Perhaps, Sigrid, you could talk a little bit about that in terms of the building in Mainz, the town hall. I was particularly struck by the colloquium in 2015 that ECOMOS Germany organized, entitled Conservation, Construction, Culture. And I thought that was very interesting in terms of how to organize discussion and have a conversation about how to change that opinion. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, perhaps I can summarize the idea of this presentation. The first is that the buildings of the 60s and 70s are a challenge, especially for small towns. Mainz, we have seen it, is a great town and can sozusagen, mein Gott, also, oh, sorry. And the second point is the interest in these buildings is a generational. Your husband mentioned it. Younger generation discover these buildings also in a sense of pop culture, and the older generations see them as part of their life's work. And other idea is that we have lots of World Wide Web initiatives from younger peoples and forums to brutalism architecture, and also for brutalism on reinforced concrete monuments, for instance, in the former Yugoslavia. And I think we have to bring together the initiatives from the young people and the discussions from the experts, from the architectural historians and the preservationists more together. And then we can, also the acceptance of these buildings on the one side and of the other side, on the other side of the monuments has the chance to grow. And especially for the Mainz Town Hall, the Mainz Town Hall is a difficult building because it's an architecture of as a symbol of the Cold War. In the 60s, we had the confrontation of the both systems, and the 70s. This is for the history for the Germany history. Very interesting. In the 70s, we had more a peaceful side by side, and I quote. Jockel Fuchs is a self-expression of the creative of our generation. This is the time of a new confidence of this generation. It's another time than the time immediately after the World War II, but unloved and an uncomfortable monument until today.
Interesting.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Thank you.
And maybe, Kyle, only one comment or one additional comment. I think we have to find out the good examples and to promote and to propagate them, that it is possible to keep it, that it is possible also to redevelop it, that it is possible to retrofit it. And that we have, of course, we have difficulties, and we in the redevelopment of concrete buildings, we have better possibilities and better solutions than we had 10 years or 15 years ago. So we will advance, and I think we have to let people know there is a chance not to replace it, not to try to get rid of it, and not to disform it, but to keep it, and even if possible to like it. And this collection of good examples, that is why we did the conference on the recent past heritage, because we said we must show people that it's not only a conflict and a problem and a challenge. We have to collect the examples, the good case studies, and to present them to follow these examples. And I think, as far as I was able to follow the discussion of the last days, there are several very good and successful examples of renovation, and also of how to go on, how to deal with the surfaces.
And I think that's correct, Jörg. I mean, I know that, for example, that is the basis of the InnovaConcrete program was not only to do more research, but also to show what those examples are and to disseminate as much as possible, you know, the different examples from various countries throughout Europe, and in terms of what has been, what people have been working on, and showing those successes to as many people as possible. Vitus, did you want to make a contribution in terms of the question?
Well, actually, probably from our experience, I would add the aspect of artistic interpretation, because we heard during our presentations a few times that probably these buildings we are not so attractive. So what we need to add some attractiveness, if it's possible to say so. And I'm referring to our European Capital of Culture, which we will have in 2022. And actually there is a program, Modernism for the Future, which is dedicated exactly for attracting artists to take part into the process of dissemination, on interpretation, on telling the stories about modern movement, and not necessarily about just concrete architecture, but a modern movement itself. So, and I really liked one idea from today, that probably we should try to minimize the impact of time, but at the same time we cannot come back in time. So we have to move forward, and this moving forward is very important. I think the new meanings and interpretation, it's about giving an attractive way to create new meanings. So that would be a contribution from our recent experience in KAUNAS.
Thank you very much. Well, I think in the interest of time, I know the organizers are moving to conclude today, so I wanted to thank our speakers for their contributions, and we had time to do a short discussion.